Hi, my name's Sam Mickelson, founder of True Worth. We're a talent solutions business, so it's all about people. And that's why we created a podcast channel. We wanted to bring together members of our True Worth collective, our clients, candidates, generally anybody in tech that wants to come and talk about their experience as a person, products, platforms or projects that they've been involved with. So you can find us on all of the normal podcast channels and platforms. Links to all of our socials are in the description. And of course, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you've got any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks very much and enjoy the episode. Good afternoon, Bjorn. Lovely to have you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I think that we're sort of six episodes in to the podcasts, and we've had various people on from people in data, in e-commerce, website creation. We've also spoken to my Danish cousin who specialises in helping startups and scale-ups to find out their why, and so you're our first Swedish guest. So welcome.
Thank you.
Now you are Swedish born, but you're now Manchester based. You live in Worsley. You have done for many years, and you're an interim CIO, a specialist really in turning around large digital transformation projects. I think really you're kind of a fixer. You specialize in acute problem solving and sometimes what we would call crisis management. I understand that mostly you've helped PE-backed entrepreneurial companies to turn around failing, I should say, digital transformation projects. And since 2003, I think you were saying you've pretty much successfully delivered 5 major global digital business transformations from scratch almost, or turnarounds, and almost on budget. Not, delivered on time and almost on budget. And over that time, it's 132 months with those companies, and they've invested circa 150 million across those 5 programs. Those are big numbers, Bjorn. So first of all, I think that's quite an amazing career you've had. Where do you start with something like that? And before we go into that, do you want to just give us a bit of an overview as to, how you got into the world of IT and what led you into this sort of leadership role in digital transformation?
Absolutely. Thanks for the kind introduction there. Well, so I could have been a great chef. I was born and raised in the restaurant business. I still love to cook. To be honest, I could also have been a half decent golfer, not a tennis player, but a golfer. My problem, though, those professions are so repetitive. So even though I was born and raised in a family restaurant business and I love to cook and I'm trained as a chef, I've kind of had a commercial career firstly, a number of years working for primarily a large pharmaceutical business. And then a little bit of a sort of a next train kind of situation brought me into the world of IT. I don't have a deep technical IT competence, never had. I don't think I ever will have, but I understand how we can utilize technology. And obviously today, it goes for without saying, all businesses really want to go digital. You have to survive in the 21st century. So I was very lucky. I started early, late last, not only decade, but last century, last millennium even. But since 2003, I helped a Baltic bank, part of a Scandinavian or international group that later hired me as a perm, actually. So I helped them turn around a failed bank modernization program. And I've been doing this ever since as an interim for the last 14 years. Been based in London, I lived in London, and I moved to Manchester in 2014. So that's what I do, and I like it. It's about people. It's not about technology or process.
And I think that rings true with so many guests that we've had on the podcast so far. It is always about the people. And in fact, only last night I was talking to a lady who's a project manager, stroke change transformation manager, and she echoed that. And it is very interesting. We do tend to forget that the technology is only there to serve the people. And I think if you don't take a product view of it, it can fall down, can't it? Is that what you found in the past?
Yeah, and absolutely. But I also think it's easy for me and possibly for you, Sam, to say we love change. We love leading change, or at least I do. I love it. People don't like change.
Yeah.
And that's putting it, in a very diplomatic way. Especially in your workplace. Let's say there's an acquisition going on. People get worried. Will I keep my job? We had the pandemic, massive change, right? How we operate. And people were not faring well. So it's sort of, I don't want to go down that path today, but if we think about it just very briefly, human nature is we want things to be as they always were, as a starting point. And that makes my job a lot more interesting, because you have to always bear that in mind.
Absolutely. And I think we're going to get to a lot of that through the conversation. So just to summarize quickly for our listeners, today we're going to talk about your experience, obviously, Bjorn. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into, where you started. We're going to explore some of the reasons why, in your opinion, digital transformation projects do kind of fall down, where they fall down and how. We'll also talk about the importance, and you touched on it just then, the importance of stakeholder management, getting the basics right. Obviously, again, change management and how important and crucial that is to get that right. We're also going to touch on skills and experience, creating that MVP, that minimal viable product, and sticking to the plan. So do you want to start off with and I guess we're going to expand on the article that you've written, which covers those areas. Where do you want to start with that, Bjorn?
Well, I think it's I think we've set the scene. We're going to talk about 5, what I've found critical success factors. If we manage those 5, there's going to be other things, but managing those 5 in the right way will I think, significantly increase the chances of success. But I'd like to start with I could do this analogy for 20 minutes, but let me try to do it very, very briefly. So my experience speaking, especially with senior stakeholders, and we'll come back to them in a bit, but they are not necessarily that technology savvy. You can't speak technology language speaking with the board of directors or an executive management team. At least not in most organizations, you can't. So I like to use analogies, and my favorite analogy when it comes to digital business transformations is building a house, actually building a prefab house, to make it even more explicit. So imagine I have a family, I have a spouse, I have children, I might even have a dog. Mm-hmm. And in order to set the right criteria in place to succeed with that project, there are a number of things I need to do. If I want to realize that dream of building a new house, I need to find a piece of property. I need to secure the finances. I need to define exactly what it is I want to do. But I think even more importantly, I need to sell this concept to my spouse, obviously. And that's obviously the stakeholders, the senior stakeholders. You need the clarity in what it is you want to achieve. And there are a number of things you need to do, like securing the finances. It might be a bank loan. You might need to sell what you currently own. You won't start building anything without a really detailed blueprint and set the exact requirement specifications for your house, number of rooms, number of stories or floors, and do you want a garage or for 1 or 2 cars, etc. And also very important, you need to do this up front. It's hard to install an open fireplace in the living room after the house is in place. It's not impossible, but it's going to be expensive. You need to figure out, how do I want to operate in my kitchen? What equipment do I need there? So that's a lot around the specs that you need to do. Then you have the rest of the family. I would involve my children very early, maybe relatives and friends, or maybe not. It depends. But I certainly want to involve my children very early, because otherwise, once the house is ready to moving in, I'm going to have a big problem, because the kids don't want to move, and so on and so forth. But what my point here with the analogy is, it's not that complicated if you do the right things in the right sequence. And this is where we go wrong. But the building a house analogy works, and yeah, that's how I approach this. I always talk about building houses when I work with a client, because people can associate with that.
And that's very much setting your stall out for very clear communication. That, if you want to look at the house analogy, it's a strategic vision on the house. So applying that same logic to a project, does that start with stakeholder management then?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there are a couple of, another, I think, maybe not analogy, but a comparison would be, if we look at data, and there is some fairly significant data from, for instance, Harvard Business School on success rates among transformational programs with significant components of IT, which is 98% of all business transformation. We see that an absolute majority of programs fail. Very few deliver business value as planned. But if we then compare with, in many ways, much more complex, much more expensive infrastructure, I'm not talking IT now, I'm talking bridges, roads, skyscrapers, the Shard, talking, building analogies. These are always completed. They may not always be completed on time or budget, but I'd say 90% are actually within time and budget as well. Did we ever hear of a skyscraper that wasn't habitable or fell down? No. I only know one infrastructure project that had significant problems, and that was actually a tunnel authorities wanted to build in the south of Sweden. It was running through a ridge. There was a big unknown, and it was very, very tricky to get through that ridge, and there were environmental implications that delayed that project with probably 10 years and billions extra. But in general, so they succeed. And I think one reason is the first skyscraper, if we can call it that, the first high rise, was actually in the Western world, was the White Tower at the Tower of London. That was built about 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago. So we have a few generations of people that have done this. Unlike digital and IT, where there are a lot of executive managers. You can go look at any organization. Take any FTSE 100. Let's say there are 8 people on the executive management team. I doubt that on average more than 2 or 3 of them have ever done something like what we're talking about. So there's a shortage of experience in one way, which is natural. The other one, which is also important too, I think, you might be incredibly successful as CEO of a FTSE 100, and you're probably a pretty good manager and leader if you hold that position. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are knowledgeable within IT and digital. And I'm not pointing anywhere, but I'm just trying to explain that I think sometimes the mindset, it takes a lot of courage, if I put it this way. If I'm the leader of a board, an executive management team, and if I'm a CEO, say, look, Bjorn, can you talk to us about this? Because I know very little. Can you explain, etc., etc.? The thing is, the same organizations are very successful in doing IPOs, acquisitions. They might build 1 or 2 new factories, and they are super professional at that. But for various reasons, when we start talking digital, it becomes very complicated and risky.
What for you are the sort of biggest risks then for companies?
Yeah. So I think number one, if we talk about senior stakeholder and what I call stakeholder alignment, it's about you need to help them establish as clear not only a vision, but they need to be able to describe exactly what it is they want to achieve. And the trick here is if you speak with the CFO, he will have one set of objectives, the CEO another, the sales organization a third, manufacturing and supply chain will have a fourth view. So that chart, skyscraper, we can visualize, is going to be 4 different buildings with 4 different people. So the alignment is about getting them to agree on exactly what it is we want to achieve. If you do that, if they can also then be not only active in the program, but take the responsibility and the accountability as sponsor, at least one of them, which is asking a lot, because it requires time in an already full calendar. If you can get a steering committee with the chairman, typically then the sponsor, that is completely dedicated to this and support you and your organization, then I think you've managed a lot of the risks that otherwise would materialize going forward, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So does that then sort of talk about that, getting the basics right? So setting yourself up for success, securing that sponsorship, getting that planning in place.
Yeah, so at this point we've identified where we want to buy the land.
Yeah.
And we know we want to do a prefab house. That's roughly where we are. Maybe a little bit more detail than that. Now, there are 2 things we need to do before we sort of launch the program, or you can do this as a phased approach. So you can say we start, but I would still argue we haven't yet started. So the basics, I mean, we can, if we make it very simple, the basics is really, I'd say 2 things. It's a more detailed requirement specification. So it's not only visualizing the building, but it's also what it's going to be used for. And of course, for a family house, it's manageable to describe it. We need 4 bedrooms, for instance. We need an outdoor swimming pool, whatever it might be. But the requirement need to be set. And I think the second part, which requires a lot of work before you launch at least the implementation phase of a program, is to define what I call the blueprint. Now, these are actually the physical drawings, but it's not drawings of a prefab house or the shard. It's the drawings that define how we want to operate as an organization. It's the business operating model defined based on best practice when it comes to the type of backbone, because in almost all cases, you define some kind of package software. It could be an ERP like SAP or Oracle or Microsoft Dynamics 365. Those businesses have invested a lot of money in preparing their software to be used in a specific way. Let's say within finance, accounts payable, accounts receivable, asset management, how the end of month process should run, so on and so forth. So the CFO or whoever he appoints need to define together with their team and also cross-functionally what that blueprint should look like. And that's a very, very important part of the planning. So that on one hand. On the other hand, and this is something I think I've learned more over the last few years, is the importance of getting certain other things in place. For instance, master data. It's a very vague term, but imagine you run a business which consists of a number of acquisitions that currently run a number of local applications. They're going to have different master data definitions. It's recommendable, not absolutely necessary, but I definitely recommend harmonize your master data before you start a program like this, because otherwise you're going to run into problems. The same goes with let's say if you're in manufacturing or you're a retailer, define your SKUs. That is, you know, the number. What products are you actually going to keep? And what I worked for one client. We went into the US. When we started, we had 850,000 SKUs, and we reduced that to 45. Just
remind me, SKUs for people.
So that's all it's what is it? It's stock keeping unit. So
okay.
So if you sell an iPhone 8 is an SKU, an iPhone 10 is a different one.
Right.
And then depending on data storage, etc. You know, so let's say iPhone or Apple with iPhones might have maybe 25 SKUs, something like that.
Yeah.
Variations of the same products. So streamline that before you start, because it just reduces complexity. So those are examples of the planning phase.
Okay. And I think you talk about that next piece being around change management.
Yeah.
And it's quite interesting because I think maybe I'm wrong here, but it feels at least like a lot of organizations don't overlook change management, but they might leave it to the you know, later on. Similar to, you know, data governance, it feels like a bit of a checkbox. We've ticked, we've done that. But if you don't get the change management right really early on, that can be a major thing that can go wrong with the projects, isn't it?
Absolutely. And coming back to the analogy, if you take the stance like some businesses do, let's involve the receiving organization relatively late in the program. It's like confronting your children in their, you know, 10, 12, 14-year-olds to then you confront them. We've actually started to build the house and we're going to move in 3 months. They're not going to like that. But instead, if you can involve them in that, let them design their own rooms, maybe design some kind of part of the garden which will be theirs as a playground, whatever. I'm sure everybody can feel that the kids would be much more agreeable. So I think here, and this goes back to the blueprint. So what you want to do, the starting point with change management is communication from group management, and group management need to invite and involve what I call a business process ownership community.
Right.
So that could be, for instance, let's say you have an international business operating in 3 regions: Europe, Americas, and Asia Pacific. You need might be a strong word, but I would certainly recommend appoint business process owners within finance, within manufacturing, supply chain, development, etc., representing each region. And then on top of that, you can have even more senior person who is then the global BPO, who will hold things together. Get them on board very early, because they need to help you design the blueprint. They need to be challenged and they need to be managed, but they need to take responsibility for defining the blueprint, defining how these organizations want to operate based on a standard set of applications. And that is a tough journey, but it's also fun. I've been in situations where I remember once there was the CFO said, I was working with the CIO actually, and we said we want to bring the BPOs together for a 1-week meeting to kick off this program. and he laughed and he said, that's never going to happen. And 6 months later, we had them all there. There were 18 individuals representing 24 different domains, or 6 domains times 4. And what was so rewarding was already after a couple of days, people were coming back to me and my colleagues saying, this is unbelievable. We've never met the other guys here. We've never met the people responsible for, let's say, manufacturing in the US, because we've only worked with manufacturing in APAC. And that team was so strong, contributing to that success. The second part is, yes, you need also to start involving the end users, not necessarily to a large extent in the early days, but later on, you need local people that can be advocates for the solution, that can train their teams, and those people, they have different names. Those roles, we don't need to give them any specific names, but they would be the ambassadors locally. They would be part of training. They would be part of testing. So the sooner you get this done, the better, because if you don't, problems will start when you are ready to launch. When you start testing and start training people, then you're going to get so much pushback. Yeah, because people haven't understood why we want to operate in a different way. Because there's not. Sometimes you need to take one step backwards in order to advance 2 or 3 steps. So it might be, I'm perfectly happy with how I operate, let's say, procurement in my part of the organization, but I realize, because the greater good for the entire business, there are certain things I need to do differently. And you can also, when you do involve people this way, you can start cherry picking best practice also internally, and you get a much stronger collaboration within the organization. So this is really, again, only about people. Yeah. And with people, you've got to, I think you mentioned to me on our first call when we first spoke a few weeks ago, it was about, I think you used the words embrace, guide, and steer when you're, and push external people. So internal versus external partners. And you've worked across a number of different industries, right? So manufacturing, retail. Did you find that
that depending on the industry, it needed a different approach?
No.
Always the same regardless.
I've done this in banking, I've done it in finance, I've done it in retail, I've done it in recruitment, professional services, I've done it in, as you said rightly, manufacturing. No, same approach. It's the same people. Of course, it's very difficult to establish a global way of standardizing a factory, sort of doing what McDonald's restaurant would do, compare with aligning end of month globally, because end of month, what finance and the rest of the organization do is fairly standard, whilst a factory can be incredibly complicated. Now, I'm the first to admit, I haven't done any sort of super complicated manufacturing processes, but no, I think the answer is no. It's pretty much the same.
When it comes then to the skills and experience, who's going to be leading these projects?
Yeah.
What do you look for? What do you look for specifically when you're looking to hire or build a team to help you deliver this project?
Yeah. I think that there are kind of three domains here. One is the actual program team. There you need specific competences like, let's say, PMO, enterprise architecture, testing, super important. There are a number of things in the background you may not think about, or you will think about it, but you may not realize it unless you've done a transformation already. Stuff like the whole IT technical side, cybersecurity, information security, etc. So you need sort of a program team, kind of core team with specific roles. When you look at the client and the business, I think that the key here is to establish that business process ownership community. 10, 20, 30 people, depending on the size of the organization or the business. One thing I learned from my own mistakes was we were about to start up a big transformation within one region. And it was a fairly big organization, and the regional president told me, I've got the best team. I've handpicked the best people, and to a large extent he was right. But what I missed, and what I would since then always do, is I would interview these people and sort of at least give myself a theoretical chance of a veto. I'll give you a concrete example. So one of these individuals was responsible BPO for customer service and sales. On paper, brilliant. The only problem was this individual had done 25 years in the same position and knew everything about as is. But also, unfortunately, virtually nothing about how to operate a 21st century call center. So that was, over that program, we actually replaced, I think, almost all of those BPOs. And I think we could have done that slightly better by me interviewing them and understanding and assessing, okay, the president believes they are the right guys. What about, based on the conversations we had, would that still be true? Now, then thirdly, you typically have an implementation partner. And my experience is, again, very, very normally very professional organizations. They are, however, in general, much more technically focused than a business. They know their products. They are very good in theory, but they are not management consultants. They are not necessarily great at what is best practice in how to operate a business based on their software. They theoretically they can explain everything, but they can't necessarily see the nuances between going down path 1, 2, or 3 for a specific process. So that's a challenge, and you, as a program responsible for the digital transformation, you need to be able to sort of judge, do I need additional resources here to help us on what best practice really looks like. Skills wise, in summary, you need to make sure you have people that have done this before, within all the domains.
And that comes back to kind of what I was maybe alluding to earlier, was with your experience in different industries, when it then comes down to the people that are going to be implementing the software or the product, I guess it really does help if they've done this before, not just with the same technology, so Oracle or SAP as an example, but also within a manufacturing environment, as opposed to, I don't know, a software company as an example. Does that make a difference then, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't mean to come across as rude or anything, but I mean,
not at all.
If I had to have a hip replaced, the first thing I would ask the surgeon is, how many hips have you done? Yeah. And actually, I worked for an organization founded by Michael Porter, who is sort of the global guru in competitive, within sort of the framework of competition, and they founded an organization called ICOM. It stands for International Consortium of Healthcare Outcome Management, and basically benchmarking different procedures within different hospital disciplines and different diagnoses, so that you gradually know what is best practice within medicine.
Okay.
But I mean, you don't necessarily have to have done a lot of this. It's also a lot about mindset. It's about sort of attitude, willingness to sort of work hard and be an ambassador for, because it's a hard sell if you want to transform a business with 5,000 staff to operate in a radically different way, possibly. But you need to have certain key functions in place with seriously experienced people, definitely.
And when you talk about sticking to that scope, that definition, you talk about eat the elephant in pieces. Do you want to sort of expand on that a little bit as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so
I think this was this is the point where we're talking about the minimal viable product, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think there are 2 or 3 comments I'd like to make. First of all, just to sort of delimit ourselves, I've never done and I will never do a bespoke digital transformation. When I say bespoke, what I mean is to build your own applications from scratch. I don't believe in that. So that's not part of my resume. It's not part of what I do, and it's certainly not part of my competence. So when I talk about digital transformation, I talk about using standard software. We mentioned some of them before. Dynamics 365 is something I worked a lot with. It's a great piece or it's a huge piece of software covering the pretty much the entire enterprise, and Microsoft are constantly developing it further, adding more functionality, adding new domains. You can get a pretty solid total package today from Microsoft that would resolve or meet most demands. Now, having said that, I think there are two things one should bear in mind. First of all, MVP, minimum viable product. It's better to do a pilot first, do one subsidiary or one function or one part of the business as a pilot. And then eventually you'll have the entire enterprise transformed, but it's still probably pretty basic. It's still an MVP. You don't necessarily have all the advanced tools enabled yet. You're limiting the scope to avoid complexity. Once you have the backbone in place, then you can proceed and add more functionality. The second one is, and I think this is probably the most important of everything we say today, and that is stick with standard. I normally initiate, many organizations have a change management board when they run programs, where a group of at some point senior managers approving change requests. I have instigated a rejection board. And I'm not joking. I mean, we would call it rejection, the rejection process, because
non-negotiables.
I worked with one client, and they had 20 million pounds in the P&L, sorry, in the balance sheet. And the chairman asked me to come on board. And I said to him, before I accept, I need to understand, what if we don't succeed? Are you ready? Are you mentally prepared to take that loss? And he said, yes. Okay, good. Then I'm fine, because I didn't want it to be a suicidal mission. Now, that organization had, and it was not a huge business. It was not a huge business. They had 1,900 change requests.
Wow.
My last two, I think in the last one, we had maybe a dozen. The one prior to that, 50. 50 is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could have spent more time on that specific domain. So stick with standard. That's the message, because you drive complexity. I mean, if you have 1,900 change requests, you're not going to deliver on time.
No.
You're not going to deliver on budget. Imagine the number of bug fixes. Imagine the number of hours development. 1,900 change requests. I mean, obviously, this is something I took over. So I wasn't responsible for the 1,900, but what we did by the end of the day, we bought the source code from and that was not Microsoft, because that saved the company. To be honest, that saved them.
Wow.
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but no, I did. So eat the elephant in pieces, MVP. But I've been in situations where the chairman, the sponsor, have demanded final say on change requests, and I applaud that. Why do we need to do this change to the source code? Configuration is something different.
Yeah, of course.
So yes.
And in your career then, and we're going to segue a little bit not off topic, but
Huh?
in your career, you've seen different ERPs come and go, but there's a steady flow of ones that will always be around. So the likes of SAP back in the 90s, when they were a new player in the market, they then went on to become arguably one of the biggest ERP platforms in the world. Oracle, obviously. Microsoft Dynamics have kind of come from behind, I guess, in the last sort of 10, 15 years. But what about organizations like Salesforce? Have they kind of, do you see any others then coming, or do you think Salesforce will eventually sort of take that market share? Do you think SAP and Oracle will still be doing what they do now in 10, 15 years time?
Sam, I don't want to take on sort of a Gartner hat here. That there are people that are more suitable answering that question. But I think what I can say is, I mean, you've got different domains. If you look at the ERP side, which is, for me, it's enterprise resource planning. It's primarily back office functions, including manufacturing, supply chain, logistics. It's finance, procurement, products, not necessarily sales, definitely not CRM. I think Salesforce is one example of a good business, and with several good products that initially at least focused on sales and CRM. You have Workday on the HR side, which is a big player. But I leave to Gartner and others to sort of predict the future. My saying has always been, it's almost as difficult to predict the future as it is to change the past. So that's my 5 cents.
I guess from the layperson's point of view, which I always try to sort of come at this with, is that from what you've told me there then, and I think this is my understanding, is SAP mainly came in from a manufacturing point of view, along with Oracle, and then Salesforce was always a CRM sales product initially, and then it's kind of grown, and that's the same with Microsoft, I guess, a little bit, isn't it?
I mean, again, sort of semi off the record. I mean, we're on a podcast, but
I'm not trying to get you to choose who you like best.
I won't. I mean, I think Dynamics 365 F&O is a great backbone for many businesses, small to medium-sized businesses. And when I say medium-sized, I mean an international business with a revenue of maybe $1 billion or up to £1 billion, maybe 2, and 10,000 staff, whatever. SAP is if we're talking, Boeing or what's the French airline manufacturer? Airbus. Boeing, Airbus. They would not. Boeing, regardless how close they are to Microsoft geography from a geographical perspective, would not go for Dynamics. Dynamics is much more medium-sized businesses, but it's a good example of a standard application that can be used. It's like a family, middle-class family prefab house kind of retailer or seller.
Okay.
Well, SAP would, you probably need SAP if you're going to build the shard.
Got you. Okay. Well, that's a pretty good way of looking at it, a good analogy. I was going to ask you about your experience in the past, and you've worked for some very different businesses. retail and insurance and banking is, of course, we've already talked about recruitment and professional services. What's been your favorite project in your career? And I guess why would it be your favorite product?
Yeah, that's actually it's a good question, and it's easy for me to answer, because I think the first digital transformation I was responsible for was for a retail bank in Lithuania. It's not that banking is necessarily the type of business I'd like to work for today. I really love, we already talked about, the fast-paced entrepreneurial businesses, but also ideally with a great ethical profile like Oatly I worked with most recently. But the bank, relatively small bank, I don't remember exact numbers, but let's say 2,000 staff, 60 retail offices. I took over halfway something that was called Bank Centralization Program. It took me a few weeks before I realized we should probably change the name to Bank Modernization Program to give it at least a flavor of something nice. But so what I remember vividly here is the first few weeks I spent with the project managers, and I think we were running 13 different projects, everything from business operating model to retail office design to actually building data centers. And I can tell you, banks should not build data centers. There are businesses that are much better at doing that. But so after a few weeks, we pulled the whole team together, including the bank's executive management and the board, for a 24-hour retreat, lunch to lunch. And during those 2 days or 2 half days, each project manager had 30 minutes to talk about what they were going to do, why they were doing it, how they were doing it, when they were doing it. And obviously we had everything up front prepared. I remember we printed like a total program plan, whatever, 50, 100 pages that everybody received. After each presentation, especially the chairman of the board asked each and every one, are you committed? Do you need anything else? And what I remember so clearly is that afterwards, this was like 2 months into my time with them, a lot of people came up and they said something that has always stuck with me. They said, now we understand why we're doing this. We understand what we're doing. We understand what we want to achieve. So I take that with me. That program was very successful. We managed to reduce the cost-income ratio from around 0.6 to 0.3. We could let around 300 people go, either leave the bank or move into more meaningful roles and responsibilities. You understand, from the cost-income ratio, we saved a lot of money. It was a really big transformation. And thanks to doing it in Lithuania, the hourly rates that we calculated were ridiculously low compared with what we would do here in the West. I mean, Lithuania is part of the EU now, and NATO. But back then, the daily rates were like £10 per person.
Right. Wow.
No, sorry, hourly rates, £10 per person, which is nothing. So that was actually, if I were to translate that, that was actually probably the second largest program I ran over 18 months. So that's my favorite. It was very much. I'll give you another example. Back then, when you walked into a bank, and I'm not joking, this was like 2023. Sorry, 2003, 20 years ago. When you walked into the bank, if you needed to make a deposit or a withdrawal, first of all, you had to go to the bank. Secondly, you had to go first queue up for one till where you filled out a form. And then you would go to the next till to either get the money or pay the money. So the whole customer experience was, and the staff experience was significantly improved. And obviously, I mean, we were just adapting to how other parts of that retail bank operated in other markets, but still it had to be done. We had to do it. So that's my favorite. Long answer to a simple question.
That's okay. That's okay. We don't mind long answers. And I guess what came across to me there when you were talking and describing that is that it was the program that probably had the biggest impact, maybe because of the technology you implemented that made everyone's life a lot easier, and you improved all of those processes, but also the human element that you got that sort of recognition from the people in the business. And I guess that really does make all the difference, doesn't it? No matter who the company is.
It does. I mean, we have very strong sponsorship. I can share a lot from that program, but I mean, just a couple of examples. So we did a weekly newsletter by email, but we also sent it out as a printed version. And if we were ever late today with that newsletter, that sort of printed 1 or 2 pager, people would come back and say, where are the updates? I spent 2 weeks visiting every single branch, traveling around, talking to people, often with a translator who would speak Lithuanian for me. I don't know if I should say this either, but I might as well share it. So when we had finally delivered, I had a meeting with the board, and the chairman of the board said, he asked me, so Bjorn, he said, tell me, first of all, I want to thank you, all of that. And he said, but I also would like you to answer the following question. So when you came in, we were about to fail. And very Lithuanian culture, he said, who in your world is to be blamed for that? And I said, well, Julius, he's a great guy, Julius Niedvara. And I actually don't think he would mind me sharing this story. I said, well, you know me by now, Julius. And you know I have integrity. So if you ask me a straightforward question, I'm going to give you a straightforward, honest answer, if that's what you want. And he nodded. And I said, Julius, it's your fault. You and the rest of the board, you didn't give the organization the right foundation to succeed from. But we could, as you know, we quickly resolved that, etc., etc. And he just nodded and agreed. So, of course, everybody was happy. Everybody had done what we wanted to achieve. So it wasn't in a different scenario. Might have been a different conversation.
But I think that kind of sums up, and it's a nice place to kind of maybe wrap up the conversation, I guess, and finish this episode. But I think what's quite nice about that is, I mean, we started at the top of we always talk about stakeholder management, getting the right sponsors in place. If you don't get that buy-in from the board in the first place, then that's when things can go wrong. So I'm kind of not surprised that Julius got it there from you. But he asked for an honest answer, and he got it. Yeah. I've loved talking to you today, Bjorn. It's been brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and obviously joining the True Worth Collective. Making an impact, hopefully, to everybody in our group, but also to other people that might be might be listening to the podcast. So I really thank you for your time and your insights. It's really, really interesting and fascinating to hear about your background and your career. I guess one last question for you, and I don't ask this of everybody, but I think it's quite apt with yourself maybe. If you were to, meet young Bjorn from maybe, 25, 30 years ago, just coming into IT, what advice would you give your younger self, knowing what you know now? And would you have listened?
That's a really good question. It's a difficult one. What advice would I give myself? Well, it's a very, very difficult question. I mean, I think one thing I would say is, believe in yourself, be committed, hard work, and integrity is so important. An alternative answer would be to say, and I think this is something I've discovered personally just over the last few years. I mean, we all have our ups and downs, right?
Yeah.
We're not on top every single day, and some people more than others. Fortunately, I'm not one of them. Suffer from mental health issues, and that could be people that we work with on a daily basis. There's no way for us to know that. So what an American psychiatrist said, and I think this is so true, he says, if you can accept that life, in order to be happy, be successful, be your best, you need to be able to accept that life consists of pain, uncertainty, and hard work. And I think that's also good advice. Pain. There's going to be pain. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and you're going to have to work hard. But if you do that, you have every chance to succeed. So that might be the alternative answer. It's been a pleasure, Sam. I really appreciate this conversation. I hope for anyone who listens that it's been rewarding. Because you just invested about an hour's time in us.
Yeah, that's okay. We sometimes go on a little bit longer than planned.
No, I meant for our audience here that they have invested an hour in listening to this. So,
well, let's hope that we've still got some people still with us, still listening. They've not fast forwarded. Maybe they do. You don't know. But I really do thank you for your time, Bjorn, and that's a great place to finish today. Thank you again, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch and maybe have you back on for. I think we might be looking at debate panels in the future and things like that, where we get maybe more than one or two people on an episode like this.
Absolutely, anytime. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bjorn. Good.